Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, this is part 2 of the labor and delivery nurse series that I've created to educate different partners and wives about the laboring process from a labor and delivery registered nurse. She goes over what she felt and during labor, and this is part 2 of the series. So in this video, I really want to get into depths of labor and talk really about labor and how it went for you, and kind of maybe get your opinion on different things. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the progress of what happened that day. So it was around 6 p.m., would you say, that the midwife came back when, she did the membrane sweep, and now she said, call me whenever the contractions are getting really bad. And it was around 6 p.m. when the the midwife showed up to our house. And what exactly were you feeling there? We were talking about it, where you were feeling much more intense contractions, but also more frequent.
More frequent, and where I felt like during the contractions there wasn't any more that I could be doing to help. I think earlier on in labor there was little things that I was consciously being like, okay, remember to do this because it will make it a little bit better. And at this point there was nothing that was making it better. The peak of every contraction felt overwhelming. I started to feel a little bit nauseous at this point. I was really, really hot and sweaty. So things just felt more consuming, I would say.
Yeah, and I think what I found was, we talked a bit about counter pressure. I'll show a quick clip or a quick photo of what we did for providing counter pressure, and what that essentially did was provide relief during a contraction, and that helped with pain during a contraction. And then for her nausea during labor, what I did was I got a fan, and I would put eucalyptus oil, just diffuser oil. I would put it in the fan, and I would turn the fan on. So not only would it provide her with a cold breeze because she was really hot, but it also allowed her to relieve some of the nausea that she was feeling, because the eucalyptus really seemed to help her. Now, there is no real evidence to show that eucalyptus will for sure help with nausea. It was just something that at the moment it was truly helpful for her. So you can always try that. You can try buying these eucalyptus oils. And what I actually intended to do was to get one of these misters. And what happens is you just pump this small container with water, and you press a button, and it mists water into their face in order to provide some heat relief. And also you can put some eucalyptus oil in the pump, and it will mist the eucalyptus fragrance that's cold to provide some relief.
That's something you could bring if you were at the hospital.
Yeah, that's something exactly you could bring to the hospital. And so that was progressively worsening, and the intensity and all that would you say was very helpful, the eucalyptus?
For me, it completely got rid of nausea. It was at that point that she came back where I was feeling that nauseousness, to the point that I had something in case I got sick beside me. But immediately after we started the fan with that breeze, and that continued the rest of my labor, even at the worst parts of the whole thing, I didn't feel nauseous anymore. So everyone is different, obviously, but for me, I found sort of that minty, just fresh, neutral air really, really relieved that. So that was one less thing that was going on.
Yeah. So I'll have a link in the description for different products that we use. If you would like, you can take a look at them. But also what was very helpful for you was changing up your position. Would you say that was very helpful in alleviating some of the contraction pain? I remember looking back on it now, I remember, there were times where at the beginning you were laying down, and then you got on your bouncy ball, and then you also bent over as well on our couch, and you said that was helpful just to relieve some of the pressure and pain.
Definitely, once again, earlier on in labor, position was so important to me, and I do think that it did also contribute to a shorter labor time because I remained active like physically moving around and changing positions often in the earlier stages to kind of help him come down, because my worst nightmare knowing as a labor and delivery nurse is as soon as you are stuck in some kind of reclining position, you're working against gravity, so baby's just not going to come down. So it was really important to me to either sit on a ball or be moving around or squat during contractions or anything like that. So I used that to my advantage as much as I could until I got to the point where I really couldn't think about moving anymore.
Yeah, you were definitely in considerable amount of pain, but I feel like the strategies we talked about in our birth plan and what we talked about during our prenatal class helped for sure. And then another thing that what I remember was, I think it was around 8 p.m. at that point when Nicole just completely shut her eyes. And that was when she was just feeling the contractions. And that goes back to the first video we talked about how she felt it kind of took over your body, really. And I think it was at that point where you just completely shut your eyes and you were just focusing on the contractions. And maybe you can mention how you were feeling there, or do you remember when you really closed your eyes and not really opened it after, unless we asked you to be moved?
I honestly think it was like the stimulation of anything else was so overwhelming to me that just closing my eyes and not seeing any light, not seeing anything moving around, it was like it kind of helped me go into myself a little bit. It wasn't even a conscious decision, but yet, once again, many patients do it. It's like they close their eyes and that's it. And I think it's just a way of sort of, in a way, maybe hypnotizing yourself a little bit to avoid extra stimulation. So for me, that cut out one sense.
And so another thing that I would do is, because she had her eyes closed, I would always ask her if she wanted water and provide her with, with fresh cold water through a water bottle. And also, I also want to mention that you told me that you could really focus on one thing when your eyes were closed. So you really said that my voice was very helpful, encouraging her, saying, you can do it. And at one point you almost said, like, I don't know if I can do this, but me providing you with a lot of encouragement helped you push through and stay at our home to deliver the baby. Would you say that was the case?
Definitely, yeah. I think it's fairly common that people will say, all I can remember is just this one person, this one sound. They'll focus on one thing. And so for me, Sepper was always right beside me, closest to my ear, so I could really focus on what he was saying. But yeah, there was a point when the midwife had returned and things had gotten a lot worse, where I wanted to be rechecked, and she said to me, she told me at that point I was about 7 centimeters, which was good, because that was the only point in the whole labor that I said before she checked me if I was the same as I had been only just an hour ago, which was that 4 to 5 centimeters. If I was the same, I don't think I could do it. I wanted to go to the hospital. But she checked me and I had made a lot of progress in that hour, luckily. But I still think I was sort of in the back of my head considering, like, okay, maybe this is too much. But Sever was like, you can do it. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, she really just took that in, and after that point she never said she wants to go to the hospital. She never said she wanted analgesia after that, so kudos to her. Like, she's an incredibly strong woman, and I give you so much respect for going through all of that. But so going back to the timeline, it was around 8:30 p.m. was when the midwife did another vaginal exam to see the progress. And it was at that time she said you were 6 centimeters, is that right?
She said I was somewhere between sort of like 6.5, 7. That's what she
Six
thought.
and a half, 7 centimeters. And it was at that point where the midwife was like, okay, you've been, in labor, you've been having these contractions. Do you want to be moved to another area? So what I did was I filled the bathtub with hot water, and it wasn't boiling water by any means, but it was like warm water. And the midwife suggested that we go into the bathtub. And that's when, would you say that the transition from like you standing, kneeling over and all that, and then going to the bathtub, did the water help you? Did you feel any relief being in the water and having those contractions, or you didn't really know what was happening?
I think that I would have had some relief in the tub for sure if it had been earlier in labor. But we missed something here that was important. Was shortly before she suggested that I move positions, I was leaned over, just squatting over the couch, and she all of a sudden was like, okay, I think your water might have broken.
Yes.
And I said, to be honest, I think I peed myself. That's what I said. I was like, I don't think so. It felt like I peed myself. The whole way through, I felt like I had to pee so bad, but the thought of walking to the bathroom is like laughable. There was no way I was gonna walk to the bathroom. It would just bring on another one. And so I thought that's what happened. But turns out, I think what happened is that my water did break right before getting into the tub, and that is why when I got into the tub, everything felt just the worst when I was in the bath. So a lot of people say, like my own mother, she spent her entire labor in the bath until she pushed that baby out at the very end, and she found it helpful. But for me, I think the fact that I was transitioning, meaning that 7 to 10 centimeter stage, there's just a little bit of cervix left, laying on my back in the bath was so overwhelming. That was the worst part of the whole labor for me.
Yeah, that's a great point. I totally forgot the water breaking, and I think it was the reason why I might have forgotten too was because the midwife was also unsure if that was truly your water. And then also another thing that I forgot to mention was when they do the vaginal exam, they check to see the cervix. So if it's really thick, they know that you need to be pushing a lot more, or you need to have the contractions progress more so that it thins out the cervix. And so that was very reassuring. One thing that was very reassuring was the fact that Nicole's cervix was very, very thin. And so when we moved to the tub, like she mentioned, not only did she feel things intensified, I also felt like things were very, very intense. She was in a lot of pain, and the midwives were there, of course, and they said that because she was grunting, because she was like, of course she was yelling because she was in a lot of pain, but throughout her yelling, she was also grunting. And that grunt was meaning that things were progressing very well. And that's how we knew that things were going really well, is because, unfortunately her pain was increasing, and as a result, she was grunting. Now, she said that, would you say that your yelling and your grunting was like uncontrollable? Like you couldn't control that at all, eh?
It felt like I was listening to somebody else. Like that's what it felt like. It was so completely involuntary. I actually would have guessed that I wouldn't be someone that would make a lot of noise. Not because my pain tolerance is so amazing, I just wouldn't have thought that would be me. But yeah, that's what it felt really out of body. And in the hospital, if we're starting to hear that kind of grunty sound, or patients say, I start to feel pressure if they have an epidural, it'll start off always like a little bit inconsistent with contractions. Some contractions you'll feel a little pushy, some you won't. And that usually means that you are close to being fully dilated, but maybe not quite. And it comes to a point where every single contraction, all you want to do is push and you can't stop, and that's when you know that someone is actually fully dilated. So that's kind of how it progressed in the tub, where it was like all of a sudden I started to feel just a little bit of a sensation, like I had to push a little bit at the peak of every other contraction. But I have no clue how long I was in there for, but Sepra thought I was in there maybe for an hour and a half or so.
Yeah, I think it was around 8 p.m. or 8:39 is whenever you went to the tub, and you came out at around 11:30. So I think maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours you were in there. And so after the tub, we were able to convince Nicole to get out of the tub and go back onto the couch to eventually receive the baby. And that whole process, I think it was from 11 all the way till 2:24 when she gave birth, was just these intense contractions. And again, she wasn't able to she wasn't opening her eyes. She constantly asked for water. And one thing that I found was very helpful too when she got into the tub and afterwards was that I had these small little face cloths, and making really, really cold face cloths throughout that whole pushing process helped her cool her down. And of course the fan was helpful, but she was profusely sweating throughout that process as well. And so another thing that was very helpful was around 12 was we could start seeing the head come out, and she was almost in disbelief because she was pushing for so long that the baby was actually coming. And of course, you know, she's a labor and delivery nurse. She knows the baby's eventually going to come, but it's just like a feeling of disbelief. And what the midwife actually suggested was that maybe you can touch down there and see and feel the head. And did you find that was helpful?
I think it just, it made me feel like, okay, this, like, the end is in sight here. When all leading up to this, it felt like I had no idea where I really was. Like they said, I was involuntarily pushing, but that doesn't even necessarily mean that you're even fully dilated. So I felt like I could be anywhere from 8 centimeters to like possibly close to delivering him. I really didn't know. Like your sensations are not normal at this point. So by the time I got onto the couch, I think that I had sort of been pushing on my own without them checking me for a little while, intermittently, and then she did check me herself and was like, okay, the head's like really low, it's right there. She held up her fingers and said, the head's like that far in there, and she's like, do you want to feel? And after that, it gave me incentive that I might survive to see the end of this. And then we started doing more directed pushing, as they call it at that point, which is where they were counting for me and saying, I need you to hold it longer, or okay, this point, you need to push past this point. And so they thought it was about an hour and a half of directed pushing before he was born. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think from an outsider perspective, she did a great job, obviously, pushing. And so one of the things that I noticed was when it got to the point where the midwives were directing her when to push, it was almost like she had 3 contractions all of a sudden. It would be one big contraction initially, and what it would do, if this is what it felt like from an outsider's perspective. I don't know how true this is physiologically, but it looked like the first contraction pushed her forward and pushed the baby forward. And then as he was going down, Nicole would have another contraction. It would try and depending on how strong she pushed with the contraction, it would keep the baby up there so that she would make progress. And the third contraction, the baby's head was moving down a little bit, but then she would have a third contraction. And depending on the strength of her pushing, the baby would either stay there for the next wave of contractions, or it would slide back down. And because she was so strong and she was able to push so well, thankfully, she was able to continue making progress, and then at which point eventually the head came out. And how was that experience for you? Did you feel the head come out?
What I felt was the thing that probably all women have heard of, this ring of fire that they talk about. And once again, I said afterwards, right after, there could not have been a more accurate name, but it was very sudden. Like, that was something unexpected to me. It wasn't like a gradual buildup of pressure all of a sudden. It felt like I was pushing and pushing and pushing, and then all of a sudden it felt like just an absolute burning ring. Like, that's what it felt like. And once I felt that, it was only probably like 3 more contractions until his head was actually born. But it is hard to push past that, because you're like, okay, I'm already dead. Now I'm on fire. And you want me to push past the fire?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, you did really well, and I think the midwives did an excellent job as well, providing you with coaching, and of course I was there trying to help you. Hopefully my words of encouragement were helpful, and eventually the head came out. And did you feel relief after that point when the head came out, or
Yes.
you felt a lot of relief?
I would say, well, the worst part of the baby coming down, of course, is having just their if the baby is facing OA or occiput anterior, you're just feeling the baby's like heads just slide down your birth canal. Like, it's quite a sensation. And so once that part is gone, it's like, that's the hardest part to birth diameter wise. And so there was a lot of relief once the baby's head came out. But it was super reassuring also that the midwife, like, this is the most intense part. I remember the midwife saying, it doesn't get more intense than this. It doesn't get more intense than this. Just get past this for like 5 more minutes. Because she was like, okay, it's safe to keep going. It's safe to keep going. Because it felt like it was not safe to keep going. Like, something horrible was going to happen to me.
Yeah.
But having her say that, I was like, okay, well, yeah, I'm feeling all these things, but she's saying it's all normal. So, yeah.
Well, you did an excellent job after that point, because you just pushed after that. Like the midwife said, it was not going to get worse. And I felt that too, as a bystander, as somebody there to support you. it definitely felt like the other pushes after that were much easier, and you were so easily able to push out the baby. And then of course we get to the last stage of labor where you're pushing out the placenta. And at that point, did the placenta feel like I remember you telling me that the placenta, getting rid of the placenta out of the body was a huge relief as well.
Well, your body basically saves a few more contractions after the baby's born, and it's just a few, but just a few more, and they're not nearly as bad, but saves that to help you push out your placenta effectively. And then as soon as that is out, it just stops. It's amazing. I don't know what the cascade of events is hormonally or what's going on, but as soon as that placenta is gone out of the body, there is no more contraction pain at all instantly.
And then after that, you know, she was essentially done, and of course the midwife checks to see if there was any tears or if, you know, she needed any other interventions there, and thankfully everything went okay. And after that, it was all finished. We delivered our baby boy, and we're very happy and thankful that everything went well and everything was healthy. And that's going to be the end of this video, guys. If you thought it was helpful, be sure to leave a like on the video and let me know if you have any questions for Nicole down below, and I'll try and ask her and answer them. But for now, this is going to be the end of this video. I'm going to be talking about other things in the next videos of this series. Hopefully that will be helpful to you too. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye.